Mike.
Are we doing this live?
It will go live, yeah.
Oh, all right.
I think a lot of people can ask us some kind of a question as well when it comes to life.
Does that what was I going to say? Do many people actually tune in live or?
Yeah, some people they tune in for some time, but the thing is, I haven't been experimenting live so much. It's just been recently that I've been experimenting with that. So, and I got some positive feedback because most of the times I would record my podcast and people would. But the thing is, I haven't been. So we are live.
That's live? That was live?
Yeah, that was live.
Or that was...
Okay, so we have gone live. Perfect. And then we will edit things in the post anyway.
So is there any way to video us from this part up? If I knew we were...
so this part up is...
from the like... So I wore shorts.
Well, that's okay. I was thinking of wearing shorts first, but I mean, honestly, if it doesn't matter to the audience. The more comfortable you are, the better it is.
All right, we'll just do this. Let me just add the other one. God dang it! This is difficult. Add this to the story.
Yeah, perfect.
Anyway,
you want to add it to your story?
I added that already, but I was going to add my
the picture
that I just took.
So you would have to go here. If you press plus, and then you go to story, and then from here you'll have to go back, and then your picture should be somewhere there.
Okay, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Let me just finish this then.
Yep.
Podcast.
Take your time.
The link. Shift. Oops.
Shift width. Yep, that one in blue should be me. Yep.
Yeah. All right, we're good. I'm good.
Okay. Let's begin. I'm sure a lot of people have logged in right now. So welcome everyone to this special episode of the Shift with CJ podcast. Why is it special? Because most of the times you've seen me talking to guests over various platforms like Zoom or Zencaster, and you guys normally see a recording later, right? But today I decided to do something different. I decided to go live. And why live? Because some of you who are in your offices or who are just chilling can log into it and get this information firsthand. And today I have someone really special. Why special? Because he's done so many different things in his life. My guest on the show today, which is right here, is a author. He is also an expert in breathwork. He does courses, training material. He's been a monk. He is also, remind me if I'm correct, holds a company which is called Breath Flow Wellness.
That is correct.
That is correct. Okay. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, CJ.
How are you doing today?
Doing great. Being here in Dubai, as we were talking, this was unique as well. That we're actually face to face versus over Zoom or something like that. When you reached out to me, I thought that you knew that I came to Dubai, and it happens to be a fluke here. So
Yeah, this is another interesting story, guys. So I reached out to Christian because of his work, and I reached out to him with an aim that we would probably do this online, like the rest of the podcast. And he sends me a message back saying that I am in Dubai, and I was like, "Wow, this could be a great opportunity for us to connect." Because, in all fairness, I know there's these restrictions and people can't get out and things like that, but the human connection you have when you're sitting with someone, you're in the presence of their energy, they're in the presence of your energy, you can look into their eyes, things become different. And this is one of the other reasons why I always tell people that if it's safe to do so, and if it's your government or your country approves it, then please make sure that you do get that human connection, you do get that time with people, because isolation can save you, but then when you are super isolated, you can also get lonely, and that could host another set of problems, as you probably know. So, Christian, again, welcome to the show.
thank you.
You have been a monk, right?
Yes,
And how long was that for?
I was a monk for 10 years.
10 years, wow. Now, when I speak to people all around the world, they either want to be doctors, they want to be engineers, they want to do something fancy with cryptocurrency, because now everyone's been talking about crypto and Bitcoin and things like this. But I hardly have come across someone who wants or has been a monk. So, why did you decide to be a monk?
Well, it all started when we went off the gold standard back in 1970.
Okay.
Just, that's sort of a joke, but not actually. When I was young, I'd heard that we went off the gold standard. That kind of plays into cryptocurrency and all that. But at that time, I was like, "You mean our money?" I was young, but in my head, I was like, "You mean our money is not backed by something tangible? It's just what is it?" But nobody could really tell me how things were structured. I started to see how made up our world is. Like we're fabricating how we interact in this world. So I started to say, well, what's the truth behind all this? What is like actually true, and what is something we're just constructing? And that led me deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole of spirituality, which came in touch with the purpose of life, which is really our own spiritual evolution, our ability to grow, to evolve, and ultimately attain the highest actualization of our character that is possible. So that's kind of where it started. Of course, it took many years before I never knew that I was actually. I never had this desire to be a monk until I was exposed to it many years later.
And did this curiosity of finding or separating the illusion from what people have been showing us for the rest of our lives, or from the beginning of our life, and the things that we're normally chasing, which is probably money, fame, power, sex, drugs, to get into this state that you feel, okay, you know what, there is, now I'm satisfied. But again, that's all an illusion, right? So were there like any books, or did you have any mentors in your life that led you to that?
Yeah, the books. I mean, one of the first books that I on that path was "Be Here Now" by Ram Dass. If you're familiar with Ram Dass, who was Richard Albert, a scientist. I believe they were in Harvard. Richard Albert, Timothy Leary, experimenting with LSD back in the 1960s until it became illegal, and then Richard Albert went to India and found a guru, Neem Karoli Baba, and he became Ram Dass. He took the spiritual route. Timothy Leary took the more intellectual route and continued to lecture as a professor and such. Uh, so he wrote this book, Be Here Now, which kind of is a very simple but very powerful, treatise to the
Hmm.
spiritual life. So that Alan Watts,
Hmm.
I read early on one book in particular called The Wisdom of Insecurity that just put into focus that nothing is secure, nothing's in our control, nothing is, and so let go. Just
Hmm.
when you let go of control, when you let go of trying to be secure, there is a deeper security that then holds you. So those, and then of course, where I became a monk was in the order that was started by Paramahansa Yogananda, author of Autobiography of a Yogi. So that book was instrumental, of course, in me steering my way to the spiritual life.
And when you were a monk, did you have to travel somewhere to be a monk? Did you have to get like a formal monk training, or did you figure this out by yourself?
Yeah, I had to travel to Los Angeles.
Okay, Los
So
Angeles. And where are you
I was a
based out
monk
of
in
at that point?
yeah, I was in San Diego at that point.
Okay.
So I was around the organization already, and so that was. But California is where the headquarters was. There was a branch in India,
Hmm.
but they encouraged those who were Westerners to stay in the Western
Hmm.
branch of the order, and so that's where I was.
You pointed out to something really interesting, which was letting go. And something that you said something along the lines of not controlling. Now, when I look at myself included and maybe 75% or upwards of 75% of the world, most of the people have this false sense of security and everyone's trying to control the next outcome. Now, you can control things by studying. This is an approach to it because you might feel like if I know so much about a topic, there is a probability that I can control it. You could control things by not doing things, right? Like the perfect example would be like not getting out of your house because you don't want to catch an infectious disease which is surrounding the world right now. And there are so many other things where people try to control themselves. But talk to us why controlling doesn't get you anything, because I also know for a fact that you can be a genius and you can be on the levels of Albert Einstein, but the way this universe operates, right? The way the tidal waves move on a full moon night, the way the winds move, the way the birds are migrating from one corner to the other, all of these things are, you can have some kind of a logic to it, but I think as humans we're far off from really understanding what it is to kind of put logic into it. And every time you think of something from one dimension, thinking that, oh, you know what, A leads to B, you think that there is some kind of a control. And then most of the people with this having this level of control, they just walk and they fall flat on their face. And then you start to realize, like, you know what? Nothing is ever in control. You might be faced with bad luck or a good luck, and that could change all the circumstances, right?
Yeah, that I think what you said there, nothing is really ultimately in our control. And I believe at the core, we are all trying to find a way to control our final fate, which is
Hmm.
death, right? And we all must succumb to it. And the thing is, it's out of our control. And that bothers
Hmm.
humanity greatly, that this thing is approaching that we've built such a fear around. And so we ultimately want to control that, but we can't. And there's no saying when we will go. I mean, statistically, most people will go later in their lives,
Hmm.
but we could go tomorrow. I could walk out of this interview and get
Get
hit by
hit
a
by
car.
bus, yeah,
Yeah. And
exactly.
so so there's this inherent need to control our destiny to avoid death, which is impossible.
Hmm.
But how it usually ends up manifesting is that we try to control other things. When something's out of our control, we try to control other things. Like if you're if you're destined to have this meeting with somebody who's going to tell you off, and you know that's coming, you can't control that. But instead, you try to control other people. You might try to control your girlfriend and say, "Don't do that," or you might try to control your dog, or what. It's like where we are projecting or displacing that need for control, which I believe again ultimately comes to the need to control our fate, which is out of our control. Now, the way to harmonize with that is to recognize we're not in control, but we can influence things.
Mm-hmm.
So as you said, I forget the example you just made, but I usually use the example of a surfer and waves. So the ocean waves come in, and if you're a surfer, you like big waves. So if you see a big wave come in, try to control it. Have you ever tried to control a wave? You stand there and say, "Stop, don't, I'm going to stop this wave in its tracks." It doesn't happen. The wave comes in, it rolls you over, you scraped on the bottom, you swallow a gallon of salt water. You're like, this didn't work. The surfer looks at a wave and says, "I can't control that thing, but I can utilize its power for my own purposes," right?
Mm-hmm.
I can learn how to harmonize or harness the power of that wave so that if I get in that pocket just right, I can actually ride it and have a pleasant experience, even a joyous experience. So this is the analogy for life. We can't control the things that happen, but we can often, intelligently influence the way things go, and then leave the results up to the divine. As the scriptural text from India, the Bhagavad Gita, said, Krishna was talking to Arjuna, saying, "Yours is the right to action, not the fruits of your action." So what that meant was you have the right to do anything in this world, but what comes of that is out of your control. Like we said, I mean, you can invest and you can do all this and you're hoping to make a lot of money, but it's out of your control whether the market tanks or whether it goes up. You can do your due diligence and make your best shot at it, but then you leave the results up to God, basically.
And I completely agree to whatever you said. And one of the things that I would also like to add in is the fear of failure. Because I think, just as the example that you gave about the surfer, if a person goes, or if a surfer goes in, looks at that wave and doesn't have the fear to fail, because right now I think most of the people have also this inherent fear that, what is the society going to tell me about this? What are my parents going to tell me about this? What is my girlfriend going to tell me about this? What are people on Instagram going to think about it? And that fear of failure comes with additional, it doesn't come with responsibilities, but then it's like a forced responsibility on us that we have to look good, or we have to, act in a certain way. And then society molds us towards doing that. But then, like the surfer example, if you aren't really fearing swallowing that water, salt water, you can just go at it. And there are so many mechanisms in our body, right? Like our brain has certain mechanisms to keep us safe. And once you go at it and you give it your best shot, and you just think that, okay, you know what, I don't really care about the results, as you just mentioned, things change. Because somewhere or the other, you can tell yourself that, hey, I'm just a bit scared. And that emotion of being scared is okay, because that's natural. As humans, as animals, everyone is fearful. But not being able to stand up again after that is, I think, what keeps people back. Would you agree to that?
Sure. Well, I would say that fear is the root of the desire to control. Okay. And the more we let go of fear, the more we let go of the desire for the result. What's interesting is we usually end up getting the result we wanted in the first place, but we have to give up the hope that it's going to happen at all costs, and just do what you do and leave the results up to the divine, and If you do that, oftentimes the results will show up. And that's what we learned experientially time and time again when I was living as a monk in the ashram. So,
And for people who are listening, reflect back on your life. Like anecdotally, we have so much of evidence. Every time you tried to control an outcome or you were fearful of an outcome and you just kept holding or attaching onto it, chances are it didn't work. And the time that you gave up on it and you're like, you know what, let it be, it's probably not going to work. And that's the time, at least in my life and the people that I've spoken to, that's the time you sort of get those results. And you're like, oh, I didn't even have to do much. And it's just that the same thing that we're talking about is just the act of detaching yourself or letting go, which sort of like, and the thing is, again, me or a Christian trying to explain it would also try to keep some logic into it. But there is actually no logic into it. These things happen in a way that we probably understand a bit, but we can't really define for people.
well, the best way to say it, what is control? Control is a holding. Control is a constriction, really. When we're trying to control, we're actually stopping the flow of energy, and we're trying to force it. It's moving in one way, and we're trying to force it into a different path that it's not necessarily inclined to go. When we let go, as you say, let go, surrender, you allow the energy to move. And the smart person will watch how the energy moves and align with that. And that's how you get the results you want versus trying to force the energy to go in a direction that it just isn't ready to go.
I love that. And oftentimes, and this is one question to you is like, if you're controlling the energy, right? If you're controlling the way the energy is moving through your body or around you in your aura, do you think that will result in that energy getting blocked, and then you have emotions such as stress, anxiety, depression? Are all of these, can these be traced back to some kind of energy or emotion that you aren't letting go of?
It can completely be traced back to that, and that really leads into the whole art and science of breath work, which is which is designed to release these blocks.
So let's talk about breath work now. You have a company which focuses on holistic health, and the name of your company is Breath Flow Wellness. Now, why did you decide to start a company, or you're an expert as well? Like, why breathwork? Talk to us about why breathwork is important and what does it do for us?
Why breathwork is important? Well, how important is breathing to you?
Amazing.
Right.
I mean, it's in a way like when you look at just life itself, our bodies are designed to take in oxygen and then combine it with food and make electrons. And these electrons are the source of our energy. And when you think of things like just, I mean, we can go over so many things, but like, let's talk about oxygen. Everyone loves to breathe in, but oxygen as well. Let's say, here's an experiment for all of you guys. If it's safe to do so, over the next couple of minutes, try to hold your breath for a minute. Take in a deep breath and then hold it for a minute or like a minute and a half. When you cross the minute mark, you will find that there is some kind of an energy crisis in your body. And that is happening because your body isn't getting enough oxygen in. Now, like I mentioned, food combined with oxygen makes electrons. But if you remove oxygen from that mix, your ability to harness energy from any food or chemicals or whatever you're having gets reduced to 6%. That is how important air or oxygen is. And it's
well,
an
use the example. I don't know how many people out there understand the piston of an automobile.
Yeah.
I mean, the piston is where the combustion happens, which drives the engine. The explosion that causes the mechanical turning of the wheels. What happens in a piston? Fuel is injected, but then oxygen is injected. If only fuel was injected, and then there's a spark, and then the fuel and oxygen create the explosion. If you removed the oxygen and pumped in only fuel, you could pump in 10 times the amount of fuel. The spark goes off. If there's no oxygen there, there's no explosion. Oxygen is the catalyst that creates the chemical reaction that creates this explosion. So in our bodies, oxygen is the catalyst that creates essentially the explosion of energy that drives the cells. They call it ATP, basically. That, as you're saying, food and oxygen combine to then create the energy which drives a cell, just like we create energy that drives a car. So oxygen is the vital catalyst of life, I would say. And so I got back to, you started on this question, what's the importance of breath work? It's like, well, how important is breathing? It is our most vital function. We don't breathe for, you can hold your breath for a minute. You can even hold your breath for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes when you're good. You stop breathing for 5 or 10 minutes and
you're out.
It's over for you. So we need oxygen. We need it in abundance. Now, how many people have actually ever been taught how to breathe? Right? It's like, does it make sense that maybe there's a proper way to breathe and maybe there's many improper ways to breathe? And I usually use the example for people to get. There's a proper way to walk. When people walk, there's various ways we can walk. And so when you walk, if you look at your shoe, I don't know, some people on the inside of their shoe, it's worn down. So what they call pronate.
Okay.
I think that's pronating. If the shoe on the backside or on the outside is worn down, that's supinating. You're favoring the outside of your foot. Well, either of those is dysfunctional. Like if you find that you're wearing your shoe down in one side or the other more than a balanced wear on your shoe. See, my shoe is very balanced because I've actually practiced walking and healthy walking. If you walk too much on the outside or too much on the inside, you start to develop knee issues. You start to develop hip issues, back issues. And this can really lead to chronic pain and suffering through your life. So there is an improper way to walk and there's a proper way to walk. So similarly, there's an improper way to breathe and there's a proper way to breathe. And most of us have never been taught really how to breathe. So we've just gone about it like, I guess I'm breathing right, but then
I'm not dying
life
yet, so.
hits us, in this way or that way, which ends up modifying the way that we breathe, and it creates more and more dysfunction in the way we breathe, and then all of a sudden we have a serious problem in our life, and we're like, whoa, I didn't realize that I needed to breathe better.
Also, when you say this, I think about I've been doing martial arts in the first stage since I was 10. And when you look at ancient martial artists, like you look at these monks who practice Shaolin Kung Fu, or you go to India and you look at these yogis, or you look at these people like Wim Hof, who've recently got so much attention as like breathwork superstars. And one of the things that you would find is that they breathe very slowly and very deeply. So on an average, you would say that a person or these people, like a Tai Chi master or an Indian yogi, would breathe about 5 to 7 breaths per minute. And now when you think about it and you tell it to a normal person, oh, you have to only breathe 5 times a minute or 7 times a minute, it becomes a bit bizarre because a lot of people these days, on an average, people would be breathing about 15 breaths per minute, right? And then you throw into, like you mentioned, chronic pain, inflammation, some kind of a disease or something where your body is like trying to tell you that things aren't right. You take a subset of these people and then you suddenly see that from 15 breaths per minute, these people are breathing all the way to 30 breaths per minute. And now, just as an example, like if you're breathing 5 breaths per minute, you're taking in an air volume of like 2 liters per minute. And the one that is breathing about 30 breaths per minute, they're taking an air volume of like 25 liters per minute. And what we see normally is that the faster you breathe, especially when you get stressed and things, you people tend to have this thing called mouth breathing. And people are normally, I, for the longest period of time, until unless I was introduced to breathwork, I thought it's just easy and convenient to breathe from my mouth. So I would just do that again, to the point that no one really taught me how to breathe. I remember asking my mother once when I was a kid, because when I was growing up, I was really obese. And so I couldn't walk properly, I couldn't run properly. And then one question that I had once was like, Ma, how do I breathe? How do I breathe properly? She's like, I don't have to tell you that. Just like
Just breathe.
you are breathing right.
Yeah.
But no one told me the
That
importance of.
was pretty much the epitome of the world, right? It's like, how do I breathe right? You're breathing, so you're doing it right.
Yeah, exactly.
Wrong.
And
That's
then
wrong.
you take it one step further and you look at athletes, right? And now when you are running a marathon, or you're running a sprint, or you're lifting weights at the gym, your breath is probably foundational to your exercise performance, sports physiology. Because if you are doing a lot of like mouth breathing, chances are you aren't inhaling so much of oxygen at that point. Because again, when you breathe in like this, when you breathe in like deeply, and then you exhale very slowly, where you have to get to about 5 to 7 breaths per minute, there is another thing that happens. You're taking in oxygen, but you're also controlling the amount of CO2 that's coming out. CO2 is carbon dioxide. And what a lot of recent studies have been showing, that CO2 is probably as important as as oxygen. Because the more CO2, because when I was growing up, I always thought that CO2 is just like, it's a metabolic byproduct of lactic acid accumulation, and it's just something that we don't really need. But then I was surprised to learn that when you have high levels of CO2 in your blood, then it has this carryover effect called the Bohr effect, which is basically your red blood cells have hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin is transporting oxygen into your to the rest of your body. But the point where you reach, where the carbon dioxide goes up, it has this effect where it disassociates oxygen from the hemoglobin. So basically, in simple words, it dumps all the oxygen back into the blood, and now you have more oxygen carrying around your brain, your heart, your kidneys. And the more oxygen you have, the better your performance is. Am I right in
Yeah.
that point?
So yeah, the more, to a point, the more carbon dioxide in your blood, that kind of attracts more oxygen into your system. It put in simple terms, yes.
And you, well, we talk about, like, you mentioned, we're always scared of dying, and most of the things, like, I speak a lot to my audience about anti-aging and all of these peptides and things like that that you can use for increasing your lifespan or your potential a little bit. But one of those free hacks is also breathing. Because when you look at, let's say you look at examples from the animal kingdom, right? It's very apparent. A whale in colder environments that breathes 6 times per minute lives about like 200 years. A tortoise that can breathe about like 4 times a minute can live up to 150 years. And there is also a certain species of rat, which is called the naked mole rat, and that lives in an environment where it basically lives under the ground, so there is higher amount of CO2, and that rat can live up to 15 times longer than its cousins. And it's all because of controlling this breath, having more oxygen, having more carbon dioxide.
Well, the ancient yogis in India, there's a philosophy that we have so many breaths. Our life is a number of breaths. And so if you breathe those breaths faster, you run out of life faster. If you breathe those breaths slower, your span of life is longer. Whether that is true or not, it speaks to the idea that as we slow down our breath, we sort of increase that longevity and are able to live longer and healthier, generally speaking.
And I like that you mentioned the fact about ATP, which is the cellular currency of energy that our body has. Now, when we spoke about this earlier, we mentioned that you have food, and then you have air, and then like the combustion engine that you mentioned. And one of the organelles that are in every human cell, we have tens to thousands of this organelle. It's called the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is responsible for producing that energy output, which is ATP or adenosine triphosphate. But there is another thing, right? Everyone's been talking about mitochondria for the longest period of time. But then there is something called as peroxisomes, which is also an organelle that lives inside the cell. Now, if you from the research that I've seen is that if you can control your breathing, and you could do it by breath work, it could just be out of your conscious effort of just taking slow and deep breaths. You also trigger these peroxisomes to do something else, which is make new mitochondria in a process which we normally call mitochondrial biogenesis, which is just generating new and younger mitochondria. So as we age, our mitochondria also gets old, and when these energy machines are old, they aren't as efficient as producing energy. But then this was very interesting to me that when you can control your breath in a way, you activate peroxisomes, and then these peroxisomes are responsible for building new and younger mitochondria. So now these younger mitochondria have so much resilience, they have so much more energy potential, and then you just use that energy for everything in life.
So it just speaks to the regenerative nature of the body, and that we don't have to buy into this model that as we get older, we basically get weaker and less resilient. And that shows up because people continue to abuse their body and don't practice the things that help to regenerate the body, such as the breathing that you're talking about and such. So we do have the ability, I fully believe, whatever age that you pass from this earth on, you can keep a healthy, strong, resilient body right up into that. You don't have, death does not equal having to be decrepit and in a wheelchair and unable to walk, or unable to perform functions that you could when you were 30 or 40 years old. So health is something that we can maintain right up to the point where we finally shed this mortal coil.
Do you have any favorite breathwork strategies that you normally would advise to people? Like people who are listening in right now, there are people who are logged in live, and people probably haven't really heard about breathwork and things like that. So give us your favorite. Is that a question?
I don't know. I'm looking. Looks like somebody.
Looks like a question. Okay, I'm going to read that question up. Let's see what people are asking. I am pleasuring. Okay, amazing. This doesn't need to be answered. We'll talk about this one later. Well, basically, this person is just telling us that we're doing great. So thank you, Brandon. Another one is so. What's your favorite work strategies? What do you teach in your courses? I know you have something called as a transformative breath.
Well, I teach my basic technique is the breath flow integrative breathing technique, which is actually an accelerated breath pattern, which is breathe through the mouth, which we have to qualify why we do this, but to sort of bring all the topics together. One is to help us to let go of control, to get more into the flow of life, to enhance our physical abilities to manage breath and oxygen and be better at our capabilities, and to learn to breathe better.
So then when you mentioned about breathing from the mouth, is this some version of what they teach in the Kundalini style of yoga, which is a fire breath?
It's not so much that. It's a very particular breathing. The breath work that I teach, I've traced back to the origins, began around the 1970s with a technique called rebirthing. So rebirthing was started by a man named Leonard Orr. It branched out into holotropic breath, which the Stanislav Grof developed. Apparently, Leonard Orr gave Stanislav Grof his first breath session, so that inspired him. That one's well known out there in the world. I went down the school of the transformational breath before, tweaking it and developing my own style. So that's where this kind of breath work comes. More the ancient practices of pranayama and such generally were more control oriented. They're about, being able to transcend your normal faculties of breathing and bring yourself into a calmer, more focused state of mind. Conversely, this kind of breathing is meant to stir things up in a way. It means that at the core of all this, when we talked about energies and holding and the control, is that we hold on to different energies in our body. Most of those energies are related to emotional experiences that we've had in our lives, where we've had an emotional experience, but we didn't want to experience it, so we held on to it. Or it was very traumatic, we didn't know how to really experience it, so we held on to it. Or we tried to avoid it, so we held on to it. All this held energy is still energy that needs to be played out, needs to come to completion. But it's inside of us trying to get out, but we're trying to hold it down. And what's interesting is, to hold it, we have to exert a lot of energy and a lot of tension. And so when people start experiencing chronic pain in their body, but they haven't necessarily had an accident or an injury or something like that, it's often, if not always, the case that this held emotional energy, we're holding it in various parts of our body. For instance, anger tends to be held in our shoulders and neck. So if you got shoulder and neck pain, chronic shoulder and neck pain, it's likely that you have a lot of unexpressed anger. You ever heard that expression? He's a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
That's because this guy you're mad at this person, but you're not expressing it. And then you build that tension of anger in your neck, and eventually it starts to hurt. So you feel this pain in your neck. You see that guy, he's a pain in your neck.
Yeah.
So the idea is we want to let go of that energy and allow it to flow and allow it to integrate, as we like to say. And this breathwork technique is designed to do that, to get in there, to stir up our energies. Sometimes it can feel a little chaotic or a little out of balance for a short period of time as these energies are getting worked up. But the idea is to offload them, to integrate that energy, so that then we are in more alignment, more balance, and can then perform at our optimal levels. All this held energy, again, is as we were talking about earlier, we're not letting the energy flow naturally. And when we let energy flow naturally is when we're in the most harmony with the natural way of things, which is where we can perform our best, or think our best, or be our optimal healthy selves.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, because the moment you hold on to something, whether it's like emotions or things like that, you also have, so our bodies are made up with so many things, right? You have the adrenals that releases these stress hormones like cortisol, and every time you held on to something, you have more cortisol that increases in your bloodstream. And what happens, as a matter of fact, is like chronic cortisol release is linked to inflammation, and inflammation is linked to all diseases of aging, right? So they call it inflammaging. And your adrenals, so there's something called as the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So your hypothalamus is in your brain, is the control center of a lot of things like your emotions. One of the interesting things that it controls is your hormones and your the way when you get hungry, or your satiety hormones or your hunger hormones. Then you have the pituitary, which can control things like melatonin release. It could control things like testosterone, estrogen. And then you have the adrenals, which then release all these glucocorticoid releasing hormones such as cortisol. So when you're like angry, or like you try to hold on these emotions, you increase a lot of these stress hormones. And For anyone who's listening, try to approach a situation where you're stressed. 9 times out of 10, those things, you won't be able to be your best because stressful thinking, it clogs. I mean, you can have the sympathetic nervous system overdrive where your blood is like, it goes to your extremes, and you're in this fight or flight mode, and you're not kind of just your rest and digest mode. And also it shuts off logical thinking. So your logical thinking is governed by a center of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex has seven or five, I don't remember it right, but all these levels, and it's all governed by, if you're stressed in a situation, should you run away, or do you think you can manage it in some way? And that's where your logical center kicks in. But then when you have all these emotions running through, you're just like, oh man, I'm just stuck and I can't do anything. And then you throw your phone away, and it's happened. It's not like it doesn't happen to me. It happens to me from time to time. I want to run away from situations. I want to just like throw my things at something, just don't want to talk to someone. But that is that emotion build up. And I like, in one of your interviews, I saw that you gave these examples of rocks in your backpack. So if you want to share that, because I think that everyone can relate to.
Well, if you think about these emotions that you hold on to, they weigh you down, right? So they cause you not to perform at your highest functional level. So I use the example of, say you've got a backpack on, and every emotional experience that you have that you choose not to allow to express and play out is like you put another rock in that backpack. And then, you have another emotion that you don't express. Somebody makes you angry, but you hold that in. You put another rock in. You put another rock in. Well, pretty soon, you're walking around in the day with a backpack full of 25 kilos of rocks, right? You are, and if you can imagine that, it's heavy. It's a tax on your system. You're tired. You're strained. And you're wondering why life is so difficult, because it's because you're holding on this backpack full of rocks, right? So if you could just take that backpack off and let those rocks fall, that's, people often describe that experience like, they say, oh, I feel like such a weight came off my shoulders. When you feel relieved, when you release some emotion, it's like, oh, I feel so much lighter. Well, that's because you took off this backpack of rocks. Almost literally, all of this weight of this emotional baggage is released, and we feel lighter. We feel more. We get our energy back, because so much of your energy is diverted to, holding on to that backpack. So when it's finally done, you can now use that energy to think clearer, or to perform better, or whatever you want to do with it.
Apart from breathwork, what other things have you come across that can let people go off that backpack, or let them release that stuck energy?
Well, there's a lot of techniques.
Tell us your favorite.
I would say, the one thing is to make the intention to do that. So, breath, sound, and movement, okay, are three fundamental therapies, I would say, that are built in. So any kind of breath work, and that includes, let's say physical exercise, just going to the gym and working it out. That's a commonly known thing. Oh, I got a lot of pent up energy, or I'm really angry. I'm going to go punch the bag.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because movement and the breath that's in there, and even the grunting and all this. This is moving energy. This is offloading this energy that's stuck and pent up in you, and releasing it. So that, that's one way. Yoga is one of my favorites, because you can. I don't know if you've ever been to a yoga class where, we get into a pose and some woman, couple rows down, starts crying. It's because we've unlocked a channel of that energy, and it starts to flow, and then it just flows out of her. Sound healing is to me one of the best. And I think one of the most fundamental forms of sound healing is singing.
Hmm.
Singing, whether it's singing songs that you know or just singing spontaneously sounds, notes, whether you are a good singer or not, vocalizing sound is a way of channeling energy out and your ability to release that energy. So those are kind of my favorites.
I think those are brilliant for anyone who's listening to this. If it's safe to do so, please take notes because this is great information. And I think personally, Christian, like one of the things that has been the most underused in the performance industry, or like, I know the people who are into healing and things like that have used it a lot, and which was your last point of sound and sound healing, because sound is, I mean, it's tangible, like but it's invisible at the same time, right? So we don't tend to focus our attention on things that are invisible, because with exercise you can sweat, and you can lift up the weights, you can punch the bag with your but with sound you cannot do that. It's just surrendering, if I can say that right, to this invisible form of energy, and then hoping that it takes you somewhere. Now, there are so many different ways to do it, right? You've got the Tibetan sound bowls, you have the gongs, and in a lot of shamanic practices, they would normally use a lot of these sound-based things. But and every sound has a resonance, right? A resonance, a frequency. Now we know that if you hear the word Om at 428 hertz or 512 hertz, then it also vibrates all of your organs in a certain way, and they kind of like release or channelize those energies efficiently. But why do you think, like, or maybe do you think that people these days are paying more attention to sound? And again, to the point that you mentioned, that singing is also a good way. Singing is a good way to even activate your vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve in the body, which is the essence of, well, basically it runs from your brainstem to all your body, and it's responsible for communication. And whether you activate the vagus nerve by singing loudly or gargling or things like that, it also builds up a lot of resilience, because most of the times it is your vagus nerve which has not been able to deal with some kind of stressors, and then that emotion spends up into like anger or frustration and things like that.
So I didn't quite catch the question there.
So the question is, like, do you think that recently a lot of people have been paying attention onto this sound?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Because I mean, when it gets down to it, I'd say there's this confluence right now of science and spirituality, or science and the esoteric, where the two kind of meet is in the realms of vibration and frequency. That, one of the most fundamental equations of science is everything is energy. Mm-hmm. And what is energy? Energy is a wave. And a wave, how we distinguish one wave from another, is the frequency of that wave, mm-hmm. the amount of oscillations of that wave. So, as we're talking, sort of they say the heart resonant frequency is, I think, 528 hertz or something like that. And, I mean, music goes from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz or something. So, or the audible sound, this is all on a spectrum of frequencies. Beyond that is, we start getting into ultrasonic frequencies, and radio frequencies and microwave frequencies, mm-hmm. and things. And we know one of the modern inventions of using frequency is a microwave. Mm-hmm. I don't advise using one, but the fact that it harnessed the power of the frequency, microwave frequencies, which are very, micro, very mm-hmm. small wave frequencies, that will, when that frequency hits water, essentially, it vibrates water so much that it heats it up. And that's what heats food, basically, that you put in a microwave. So, to take that understanding and recognize that all frequencies have some kind of effect. Some are positive, some aren't so positive. when we recognize, it's recognized that beings, every living thing has a resonant frequency of its own. And so the simple equation in sound healing is we're looking for frequencies that harmonize with our frequency. In other words, if we're resonating here, we want something that's along the lines or something that's in a multiple of that that's going to amplify our frequency. And on the other side, frequencies that are out of alignment with ours are detrimental to us. So there's a technology today that has actually used this to our advantage, which is called noise canceling technology, right? Noise is going at a frequency. And so the noise canceling technology looks at that frequency and creates an opposite frequency that then neutralizes the wave of the noise. Thereby, we cancel it and hear minimal noise. All right, now that's a positive thing. But if we're talking about our frequency and we meet with frequencies that are out of alignment with us, it's going to cancel our frequency, which leads to degeneration, diseases, ultimately death is the final cancellation of our frequency. So
yeah, it's very interesting that you speak about frequencies in that way, because again, like you mentioned microwave, and then you could, as you move up and up that frequency mark, you have things like electromagnetic radiation and things that we get from traveling and from Wi-Fi routers and mobile phones. That is one reason that I always keep my phone in airplane mode every time it's on me, is because our bodies are used to having some things, like, because the earth is vibrating at a frequency as well. You have the Schumann resonance, which is 7.38 hertz, and that's the frequency that for example, me and Christian are harnessing right now. You guys can't see it, but we're under our feet. We have a grounding or an earthing mat, which is connected directly to the ground, and it's supplying us with the negative electrons and the frequency of the earth right under our feet. So as we are sitting in this lovely room, but we're still connected to the ground and grounded.
So that's a good example. Like, we are made of the earth, so our frequency is in harmony with the frequency of the earth. So to be able to get in situations where you can be exposed more to the frequency of the earth, and this mat is one of those ways of modern a modern technology way. Here we are in a house that's steel and concrete and electrical wires, so it's like it is interfering with the frequency of the earth. That you create a mat that can actually bring that earth frequency up here. Of course, the easiest way to get in touch with the frequency of the earth is go stand on the freaking earth, right? And or swim in the ocean. I mean, the ocean is another one of those that, there's waves of life moving. We can actually see them on the surface of the ocean, but waves of energy are consistently pulsating through the ocean. And it's a very regenerative experience to that's why people go there, like baptisms and things like that are rooted in this idea that that we are washed with these frequencies and regenerated or renewed as a result.
I mean, yeah, along with that, you have, if you're going to the ocean in the day, then you have the sun. So you have a full spectrum of light, which is also a source of life that comes in. It hits your body. You're walking on either the beach or, hopefully you're not wearing shoes or something. But then you enter the water, and then you have these spectrum of minerals that transdermally get absorbed. And then it again restarts this regenerative process. Like, I've heard that the ocean's water is like the amniotic fluid of the placenta, and is just the same reviving energy, like you mentioned. And it's great because our bodies are also electrically sensitive. So every time your body gets hit with this non-native EMF, your cells are driving more calcium into the cell. Then they have something called as voltage gated calcium channels, which then this is the word from just so many of these electrical geniuses, which say that, okay, every time you get hit with these frequencies, your cells open up these spaces, and then there's calcium that drives into the cell. And what happens is that these cells get excited to a point that they start dying. So when you're not connecting with the earth's frequency, or not going to the ocean, or not walking on a grass, you're always in this state of hyper arousal because that's exciting yourselves. And now we see from the time the shoes have come on, and we're losing this connection with the earth. There's ADHD. There's so many of these nuanced problems that are coming into the society.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that so many people have been doing this for the longest period of time. Like you look at ancient shamanic traditions and like the Indian traditions, and people in Mexico doing different kind of things. Now, one, we speak about consciousness, spirituality, breath is probably like things like holotropic breath work is probably one of the very powerful ways of understanding, what's beyond what you can see. LSD might be one, but there's also other things, right? Plant medicine, for example, which gives you a complete different idea of what's going on. Have you experimented with plant medicines?
Well, I used to work at a retreat called Rhythmia Life Advancement Center, which is located in Costa Rica, which it was the first and only licensed facility to administer plant medicine in the world.
Oh, there's
many facilities nowadays. I mean, they've cropped up everywhere, but this is the only one that's actually licensed. And I went there as the director of the breathwork program. So they did plant medicine, but they also did breathwork. And I feel like, what we're talking about, I think we were talking earlier about biohacking, essentially, ways to understand that we are more than the limited concept of what we think we are. And, so many of those ways can be natural. Many of those ways can be additive, meaning we bring something into our system that helps us shift our perspective. And so that's what plant medicine or LSD or something like that. A lot of the psychotropic substances and things are getting a lot of attention these days because they are helping people understand that we basically put ourselves in a box. We learn what life is meant to be by whoever else, before us taught us, this is how you do things and this is how it runs. And we just, I often say it's like water to a fish. A fish has no idea that it's in water, right? It's there. Water is its environment, and it can't tell whether it's dirty water or clean water or what have you. So we just take for granted that life is how we've been taught it is. There's a fundamental understanding until we start to pop ourselves out of that box and say, whoa, I've been in this box, but I see that outside the box, there's so much more. And now we start to expand our box and learn how to maximize our potential, which, from a spiritual perspective gets in the philosophy that we are all creations of the one divine energy. In essence, we have the seed, if you will, of God within each of us, so that we are meant to express godliness, right? That all of us has the potential to be as magnificent as whatever you can conceive God to be. So, but we've learned that, you're a bad person, or you're a sinner, or you have these, you have these limitations, or, you can only do so much because you're only that smart or whatever, so life has taught us to think that we're less than supreme and divine. And these biohacks, which breathwork's one, the plant medicines and these psychotropic things, and fasting can be, sweat lodges, things that push us beyond our boundaries, make us realize that these are artificial boundaries, that we've created boundaries. Once we're pushed beyond them, we thought that was the end. The boundary was the end. There's an end to the universe. Now we just, no, it just keeps on going and going. You get to the end and you're like, oh, there's still more, and you keep on going. So these things are helping us now to recognize that we have more potential than we heretofore thought we did, and that's creating quite a revolution in this day and age.
Well, I honestly have been 2 years ago. I planned to do my ayahuasca journey, and then the first time I couldn't travel. Then COVID happened, and I was planning to do it either in Costa Rica or Peru, and then their embassies were shut. They weren't giving any visas, so I took it as a sign that, oh, it's not my time yet. But I haven't tried these things yet. But I'm very curious to kind of dive into the world and like understand what is beyond. I mean, I've heard that some people can have experiences which are kind of like not so pleasant, and some people can just ride along that wave.
Well, right. So this gets back to our idea of control, right? Circling back to the beginning of this whole thing. When you, especially in plant medicine, it can happen in breath work as well. When you want to be in control, that's usually where the unpleasantness comes in. Mm-hmm. If I could boil down the spiritual life to one concept, which shows up in these mind expanding experiences, it is surrender or letting go, right? Which is the opposite of control. Control is trying to hold on and steer. Surrender is to let go, let things flow, and then find your flow within that. So when you're in a plant medicine experience, that substance has overtaken you for a certain period of time. As long as it's in your system, you can't run from it at that point. Mm-hmm. And this is where somebody takes something and they're like, oh, I don't, this is unfamiliar to me. I don't like this. I want to feel the way I want to feel, which is control, right? I want to feel the way I normally feel. Now you're fighting with the feeling. It's like you're not feeling like you normally feel because this substance is in you, but you want to, but you're not. Yeah. So there's
always this clash of energy,
right? So what do you do instead? You're like, this is unfamiliar, but let's surrender to it. Let's just go with it. And in that experience, then you drop into the feeling. What a mentor of mine once said, consider that the pain and suffering you feel in any experience is about 10% the experience itself. The other 90% is resistance to that experience.
Wow.
Okay, so again, in this equation, if you're fighting with this plant medicine experience, you're going to suffer because you've just multiplied your suffering 10 times by resisting it. You let go, maybe there's a little bit of discomfort within it, but again, literally 10 times less discomfort, manageable to get through it. And then when you learn how to really be with that experience, it can actually become quite pleasant, quite enlightening, and quite life-changing.
Wow. Okay. So the trick is to give up control. like we mentioned in the beginning of this podcast. Now,
breathwork can help you do that.
Breathwork can help you do that. Now you do breathwork courses. People can log on. Do you do online courses as well?
I do. If the best way people find me is to go to my website, breathflow.com, and see. Unfortunately, of course, because of COVID, a lot of my live used to do seminars and workshops in live formats and all that. I've done Dubai's a bit more open and such, and done some things in small groups here and there. That's in allowable situations. But so most of my work right now is done online. Mm-hmm. I do individual sessions and have done group sessions, in the Zoom format, basically. Yeah. And at first I thought, well, this is very interpersonal type of process, and didn't think that it would really translate. But I was surprised at the feedback that I was getting from people who are actually doing it online, especially those who had never done it live before, that they were getting as powerful of experiences, in some case, I'd say even more powerful experiences than some of the live sessions that I've done. And I think in some ways there's some benefits. People are more relaxed. They're in their own home. They're not in I mean, when somebody come to see me for the first time, it's a vulnerable process, because we're opening up, we're letting our shit out basically. And being physically present with a stranger, me being the stranger, in other words, even though they come to see me, so sometimes there's a little bit of hesitation and all that. So being in the comfort of their own home, being whatever other elements, it seems to support their process even more. So it's been very valuable. And so people can find me on breathflow.com. They can contact me there. There's a contact me page. If they have any questions based on this interview, if they're interested in breathwork, either for performance enhancement, physical performance enhancement, for emotional release, which is related to physical performance enhancement, or to that spiritual awakening and evolution. That's my favorite path
to get there.
To get there, exactly.
And would you be doing any more? Before we started this interview, we were offline chatting, and you mentioned that you might be here in this year, end of the year,
in Dubai.
Yeah, in Dubai.
Yeah, I plan. I mean, my best plan. Again, you make plans and then God laughs, as they say. But my plan would be to come back when the weather is beautiful here. Okay. So near the end of October into November, I'd like to, my best plan would be here during those beautiful months, November to April or so, and then in these hot months, be back in Colorado and California, where it's beautiful.
Beautiful at that time. Now, guys, this interview has been fantastic, and now you know where to get hold of Christian, and you know that he's coming back to Dubai. So if you have any questions, you want to contact him for anything, please feel free to do that. We'll put his website details on the show notes as well. And now we're almost at the end of this interview, and Christian, I have this one question that I have to ask you, right? Now, if you had a time machine, let's say there had been a time machine, but again, in your consciousness, you can go back, and you could rewind back time. You could go back like 20 years, 30 years, and give yourself one or maybe two pieces of advice, knowing all that you know right now. What would that be? Something that could also relate to our audience and something that they could take away from this interview today. What would that be, that one piece of advice?
My one piece of advice would be before, and I would go back in time just enough before Nike got the slogan so that you could trademark it, but just do it, right? And independent of the Nike trademark, to say that take more chances, get involved in the things. When something inspires you, to go try it out and not be afraid of failing, as we were talking about in the beginning. It's like that failure is the path to success. Like the path, well, you could say the path to success is paved with failures. Basically, you fail. If you want to use that, failure is basically just a success in the making. You may have heard the Thomas Edison story. Guy who invented the light bulb tried 10,000 different filaments, things to, the wires in the light bulb to light the bulb. 10,000 different ones. I mean, most people would have quit after trying 5, right? But let alone maybe 1,000 or something. But to try 10,000 different filaments to finally get, I think it's tungsten filament that create the incandescent light bulb, and it changed the world, right? But he didn't give up; he kept trying, and so the idea that that failure is actually getting you closer to success, and not to not to view it as failure, but to view it as
A stepping
a
stone
stepping
to
stone. Right,
success,
exactly.
and be more persistent and
And just try those things that inspire you, rather than be afraid that you might fail, so you never
give it a
try it in the
shot.
first place, which seals the deal that you did fail. Essentially,
Hmm.
you failed to accomplish something that you really wanted to do because you never tried it in the first place.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work that you've been doing. Thank you for the wisdom that you've shared with all of us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everything.
Mm.
And I hope to see you the next time you're here. You're leaving soon, so I hope to spend some time with you the next time you're here. And this is CJ signing out from the Shift with CJ podcast. I hope you guys have got a lot. I don't hope, but I know that you guys have got a lot of value from this. And see you in the next podcast. We're going off now. Thank you so much for your presence.